definitely in the top three for me. Aliens is always number one for me too, and I think Alien because it's the first one and Ridley Scott, then this one, and then David Fincher one. One thing I'll talk to you about the colony scene in the beginning. It reminded me a lot of Blade Runner, the original
Mm.
one. You know, that feel, that environment that they created, and some of the shots. It was just the old way of filmmaking, like camera just following the characters and showing the environments. It didn't cut away to tight shots just to cheat. It was really well done. Music, production design, visual effects, everything was fantastic.
Yeah, no, the music as well. It's kind of this. It's funny. I didn't really notice it until certain points, and then it's kind of like
Yeah,
this kind of throbbing electronic score, I guess, is how you describe it. But it doesn't ever announce itself as one of these big scores, big orchestral scores that you get in kind of Hollywood movies a lot of the time. But it's just playing under the surface and kind of keeping the tension going. I mean, you mentioned the tension, and it really is a very tense film. I mean, again, I don't want to spoil the scenes too much, but I think there's a really clever sequence where they're trying to cross one part of the ship to get into another part of the ship, and they have to raise the temperature of the room so
yep,
that
yep,
the
yep.
face huggers can't spot them because they react to temperature. So that was a really clever idea. I guess that's something we've not. I think what the script really did very well was something like that, which I guess makes you think about a face hugger in a different way than perhaps you've done in a previous Alien film. So he kind of played with the mythology without ever sort of doing something ridiculous. I mean, people will have their opinions about the ending, which we won't go into, obviously, but generally speaking, I think he touches on what not just the alien creatures and their kind of mythology and their biology, if you like, but also the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and their kind of ruthless nature. We kind of know that already, but I think we see more of it here. We just see a little bit more about the company. Even very, I think we could say right at the beginning, Kaylee's character Rain is trying to get off that colony, that mining colony, and she supposedly has done enough hours to, to be released from this kind of servitude that she's in, and then she discovers that they've just raised the quota and she can't get off for another 5 or 6 years, and that just shows how sort of as a small example of how ruthless that company is. Which again we've dealt with in the past in the previous films, but I think here we see it in a different way. We've seen that company operate more on a ground level, on a wider level. So I think anyone who's a big fan of the franchise will probably appreciate seeing more of this universe expanded without it being, ridiculous or over the top or anything like that. I think it's very subtle the way he just toys with that mythology. Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. Again, you could say the Mandalorian did something similar in the Star Wars universe. It sort of dumps you back in a universe you're familiar with, but then takes you off in a sort of an adjacent tangent. I mean, I'd say if I had to pick holes in it, that I wasn't that keen on the performance. Well, it's not so much the performance, but there's maybe it's coming from London, but there's a character. I think he's called Bjorn, but he's played by Spike Ferns, who is the very London one who swears a great
Oh, right,
deal.
right, right.
I could have done without that swearing. I didn't think it really added anything to the film. It wasn't particularly clever. But you could argue that they're young and obviously they're in a horrifying situation. So I'd probably swear if I was in that situation. But, I could have done without that. But aside from that, I thought the performances were really good. I think her name's Eileen Wu, who plays Navarro, who's one of the sort of team that are kind of
Right.
trying to heist these cryopods in the early part of the film. I thought she was great. She has a great sequence. Again, won't go into it. Too many good sequences to spoil. But I think that probably the best performance has got to come from David Johnson, who played Andy, the sort of synthetic, because he's
Couldn't agree more.
very timid in the first section. I mean, he's kind of regarded as a brother, let's say, to Rain. I mean, not an actual biological brother, but we learn that her father's rescued this android and sort of given him one directive, which is basically to look after Rain. But then things happen to him and his personality changes. And I think it's just a great performance from him. We just see two very different performances that he gives, and I really like what he did there. I think that's going to be a real breakout performance. I mean, he's known in the UK for a BBC show called Industry, which is all set in the kind of financial banking universe. But this is obviously very different, you know, a sci-fi. And, you know, you could rank him alongside Lance Henriksen, where he played Bishop in Aliens, and
Mm,
obviously Ian Holm playing Rook in the original Alien.
right.
Yeah, he's just as good as those guys. And those guys are obviously very, very esteemed actors. So, yeah, no, I was really impressed by him, particularly.
Yeah, he was the best thing in terms of performance. I mean, everybody else was great too. You know, the whole swearing part, I'm glad you mentioned it because for me it wasn't that particular, you know, scene where he's just swearing for no reason, but I just felt, and I get it, in the intensity and everything. And I also felt that in certain scenes there was an homage given to the original films, like with some language, on purpose. And but but one of the things that I really enjoyed with the film that, and I don't know, this is just me being a Spielberg fan, there was a lot. I felt there was a little bit of, you know, the tension that was in Jaws in the first Jurassic Park, especially Jurassic Park. I just felt that in this film, and he really took it to the next level where, you know, again, the music part, one of the great things about the music was you said it was playing under the surface. The only time what he did was, and I noticed it like maybe later part of the film was there would be these sound effects and this conversation and all this stuff, and the music will slowly start ramping up without you even realizing that it's happening until it builds up to an intense level and you're like, oh, and that's when you start feeling those emotions of that fear and that, you know, surprise and all that. No, it was really, really, really cool. I can't wait to see it again. And I'm glad I saw it in IMAX, even though it wasn't shot in IMAX cameras. I don't think it was shot in IMAX cameras. I think they enhanced it with 4K, and I could be wrong. At least that's what I read. Um, but yeah, hands down, and probably one of the best Alien films.
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, do you feel like I don't know because they're calling it like an interquel, which is a terrible phrase, but basically it's obviously coming in between Alien and
Yeah,
Aliens. Now, do you feel like this a bit like let's say Rogue One? Now, Rogue One, the Star Wars film, obviously came before Star Wars, basically, and because it's obviously about the building of the Death
right,
Star.
right.
But effectively, you could call it, you know, coming after Star Wars Episode 3, and then if I've got that right, I'm now trying to remember if I've got that right. But yeah, before the original Star Wars. But and Rogue One is effectively a one-off movie. You can't really repeat it because, you know, spoiler alert, but some characters die. I won't say who, but if in case you haven't seen it. But here it feels like we can't really repeat. It shouldn't be repeated. This idea. It's like we shouldn't have a sequel to Alien Romulus. You know, where they have another film before Aliens. It's like a brilliant idea, and it feels like a one-off, and they shouldn't do it again. That doesn't mean it won't stop the studios doing some sort of sequel, but I just feel like he's got it so right. It doesn't need a follow-up.